All right. So this evening I want to talk about the road to the Declaration of Independence. And what we see here is that document, the Declaration of Independence. That's a real pretty version, and that's the one we're used to seeing. That's what the current version actually looks like at the National Archives. So the original is not quite as pristine as the one we're used to seeing. But it starts, the first paragraph it does, with when in the course of human events, and it goes on. But basically the key here, and I'll be coming back to this, is when it becomes necessary to dissolve these political bands between the two nations, the two territories, if you will. The Continental Congress felt that it was necessary to declare the cause which impelled them for the separation. So it wasn't just a document stating our independence. It was an explanation of why the founders felt that they had no other alternative. In the second paragraph, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." But the question is, and the question that I'll be exploring this evening is, how did we get to this point? So the agenda for this evening is something of a historical timeline, and I'm going to be dealing with why we came to America in the first place, the road to independence, celebrating the signing itself, and establishing the nation. This graphic of a timeline over here has absolutely nothing to do with the Declaration of Independence. In fact, it's taken from Napoleon's march to Russia and his retreat. So, but it's a cool graphic, so I decided to use it. Some of the artifacts, the postal artifacts that I'll be walking through with you this evening are the celebratory stamps, covers to and from the signers, covers dated near the 1776 signing event itself, some broadside illustrations, some recent commemorative covers, because this is not all about the history, it's about our continued celebration of it. But let's start, let's start with 4 examples of why we came to America. Talk a bit about Virginia Dare and the Roanoke colony, Jamestown in 1607. Pilgrims landed 15 years later, and another 10 years Swedes and Finns celebrated. But first, Roanoke colony was established on the Carolina coast. And this was really the first colonization effort that was focused on imperialism, the establishment of a colony. It was intended by the English to secure their foothold in the New World. And many of the colonists, of course, weren't all about imperialism. They were about getting free land and
recording in progress.
And what was represented as limitless opportunity. I need somebody to mute themselves, please. We're getting feedback. Thank you. Now the Roanoke colony vanished. So somebody's not muted. Please mute. I'm getting feedback. Second effort was an effort at Jamestown, and this was really the first successful settlement, and it was driven by pure profit motive. It was driven by commerce. It was founded by the Virginia Company in search of profit. So that's the second reason for the exploitation of this new world. And it was tobacco that the Virginia Company focused on, and it was tobacco exports that ensured the colony's real success. Despite its commercial intent, Jamestown also served to strengthen England's imperial position against Spain and a lot of the other expansionist countries that were visiting the New World. 1620, the Pilgrims arrived. They had a third motivation here to come to the New World, and that was religious freedom. But they were also looking for political freedom. That's another personal reason to emigrate. So we've got three sets of reasons, three different events that characterize them. Swedes and Finns, it was really the Swedes here. The stamp was issued to make nice to the Finnish portion of those early settlers, but they created a colony along the Delaware River, and Sweden was again looking for trade, especially in fur. But as with pretty much every effort at colonization, again, land acquisition was underlying all of it. So over the next 100 years, from the mid-1600s to the mid-1700s, you had three things going on. You had the growth of the colonies itself, expanding both in territory and in population. There was a lot of self-government expansion, assemblies, courts, town meetings, formal organizations that were not encouraged, particularly by the English back home, but those local institutions were developing as well. And very clearly, there was a maturing Atlantic economy. Trade networks, the port cities were very, very prosperous at the time. So let's take a look at that. Here we see a map of the settlements as they looked in 1650, and that pink is the British. You can barely see where the Dutch and the French are. The Spanish were primarily the operators here in the New World. And yet you look 100 years later, and the map looks totally different. The British again had those 13 colonies, but in back of that, it was all French territory, and the Spanish had gone up the west coast as well as through Florida. From a population standpoint, in 1630, we had 4,600 residents at the very beginning of the colonial period. By the decade of the Declaration of Independence, we had 2.2 million people living in the New World here. So that's a very dramatic growth. The colonies were healthy. They were growing rapidly. And if we look at the trade routes that had been established, we can see so many different reasons here where products were going back and forth. Slavery was a big piece of that, unfortunately. But it was boom times in the New World. So with these three elements as a background showing the strength of the colonies and why we came here and that it was so successful, there were other factors at work as well. there were a lot of imperial wars that pretty much demanded that the British establish much stronger control over the colonies. British navigation, because of all those trade routes, British navigation needed to impose rules and commercial restrictions to try to get some control over this very healthy colony, a set of colonies that really were not under regulation at all. And that's what set the stage for a truly deep colonial dissatisfaction. And there's two events that triggered the worst of the responses. The first in 1765 was the Stamp Act, followed 8 years later by the Tea Act. Some other events on the road to the Declaration are the Goddard Plan proposal, and we'll get into that in a minute. The establishment of a colonial post office not under the control of the King of England, and finally Thomas Paine's Common Sense. The Stamp Act resulted when the British put a tax on printed material and legal documents. So those were, because of the health of the colonies and the number of written transactions, this was an easy way for the British to impose taxes.
Oh,
Well, what was key is that this is the first.
I didn't know you were going to do that, or I wouldn't have changed.
Folks, please mute yourselves.
I kind of got to get that thing done.
Yeah, I was hot. And well,
Gary Flanagan, please mute yourself.
Oh, sorry.
As I was saying, so this was the first time since the founding of the colonies that Parliament had imposed a direct tax on the American colonies. Totally new in 1765. Widespread protests, there was strong reaction, and there were these stamp agents who were chartered with the responsibility for collecting this tax. But there was so much intimidation going on that many of them resigned. You've heard the phrase before, no taxation without representation. It was this event that gave rise to that phrase. So what we see here is a proof of the hand stamp used to tax printed matter. This is a proof. The pushback is exemplified wonderfully by this Stamp Act defiance placard, and it was penned by someone that up on top declared pro patria, for the fatherland, and the text generally reads, the first man that either distributes or makes use of stamped paper, let him take care of his house, person, and effects. And it's signed Vox Populi, the voice of the people. And below that, just to rub it in a bit more, he said, we dare. So this is a pretty strong affirmation of defiance against the Stamp Act. Here's an example from the Halifax Gazette, and you can see the stamp on this sheet of paper, as well as this woodcut of the devil. There's a bit of subtlety here. The sheet of paper with the stamp is on page 2, not on the front page. And if you notice, that stamp is upside down. What the printer did, because normally the stamp would be in the lower right corner, he turned the sheet of paper upside down when he printed the newspaper, just to rub it in a bit and show his dissatisfaction. So newspapers, of course, were one of the prime documents that were being taxed. And around the colonies, there were a great deal of literacy, so there were a lot of people reading the papers, and that's why the Stamp Act sought to raise funds through the taxation on newspapers. Very, very unpopular. You look more closely here, you can see that the stamp is upside down and the devil is prodding it with his pitchfork. But the Stamp Act proved so unpopular that a year later, Parliament backed off. They rescinded it a year later. And you might think that the establishment in England would have learned from the Stamp Act, but no, they didn't. In the face of growing colonial dissatisfaction, 8 years later, England again imposed a tax. This time it was the Tea Act. It was designed for a couple of things from the standpoint of Parliament. Number one, it wanted to help out the struggling British East Asia Company by forcing tea purchases in the colonies to take place through the British East India Company. But beyond raising revenues, Parliament again was looking to reinforce that it had the right to tax the colonies. And the result was the Boston Tea Party. What's interesting about this Tea Act is that it actually lowered the cost of tea to the colonies. But it was really the imperious imposition of the tax by Parliament that inflamed the colonists. So I love this set of 4 stamps. It's really a wonderful graphic representation of the Tea Party. A couple of hundred years after the event itself. And on the 200th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, we celebrated that event philately. Here's a few covers, first day covers with those stamps on them. And here's our old friend, John Adams, and just a great, I'm sorry, Samuel Adams, I beg your pardon. Just a great representation. This was from the time before he became a brewery, as I imagine. The Goddard Plan was proposed in 1774 because the British controlled the post office. It was known as the Parliamentary Post, and censorship was taking place and just plain old-fashioned snooping. It was a major concern among patriots in the colonies, and Goddard proposed a constitutional post to ensure that the patriots could keep their business private. Constitutional, by the way, doesn't have anything to do with the later Constitution of the United States. It was a term meaning sovereignty, meaning not being regulated by the British back home. Goddard first introduced it early in 1774. Then it was published in the Virginia Gazette, July 7th, 1774. And here's the original. It's in the National Postal Museum. Interesting document. I've seen it there. Published September 29th of 74. Continental Congress adopted Goddard's plan, but much to his dismay, they appointed Benjamin Franklin as the first Postmaster General. And Franklin, of course, because he was postmaster, was entitled to free postage. Here we see an example of one of 2 examples with this Boston 1776 straight line. But In the upper right, you can see that it is a free franc for our postmaster. And here's another example. This one's a Philadelphia example. We see the Be Free Franklin up at the top. And this was a folded letter that was addressed to Colonel Bull of the Pennsylvania forces in Perth Amboy, and it went via Philadelphia, as you can see in the cancel at the bottom there. Ben Franklin was and remains an incredibly popular figure in American history, as I'm sure you all know. In fact, if you exclude the U.S. presidents on postage stamps, no person has appeared on more postage stamps than Ben Franklin, and the only person who has more appearances is not Washington, but Abraham Lincoln. What really finalized the direction that was driving us to a Declaration of Independence was Thomas Paine and his pamphlet, Common Sense. Now Paine was a newbie. He had just arrived in Philadelphia the end of November of 1774, but he was a passionate rabble-rouser and a great communicator. And his communication came out in this pamphlet called Common Sense. There's no question but that his passion and his ability to communicate led to a very, very wide distribution of this document. And notice there were no stamps, no tax stamps applied here. So what was going on at this point in time, really, there was going to be no turning back. In April 19th, 75, Lexington and Concord took place, those two battles in the Boston area. British troops marched to seize colonial military stores. Fighting broke out, and the British were actually defeated in that battle. And this was the opening, really. This was the opening of the Revolutionary War. The Second Continental Congress met May 10th of that year, convened in Philadelphia. But the key is that at that point in time, Congress really started functioning as a de facto national government. Before that, they were meeting and talking, but now they were starting to act as an actual government. Among their first acts was the creation of the Continental Army and the appointment of George Washington as commander. And that took all of these local militias and unified them, or most of them, under Washington's command. July 5th of 75, Congress was still hoping for some sort of solution that didn't involve war, and that was the Olive Branch petition. It was the last formal effort at reconciliation, even though military action was going on and preparations were rising. The fighting continued late in 75 and early 76, and the British weren't interested in any sort of reconciliation. As a consequence of that, Congress shifted from rights within the empire, let's see if we can fix this and stay together, to a different concept, which is that separation was the only alternative to break away from Great Britain. So on May 15th of 76, Congress issued recommendations, pretty strong recommendations, urging the colonies to form new governments and that broke all the remaining fragments of royal authority and set the path towards independence. A gentleman by the name of Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution, the Lee Resolution. And this is where the concept came from that the colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. I'm not talking about a United States, but that the colonies were going to be independent states. That was followed June 11, 4 days later. Congress appointed Committee of Five, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Sherman, and Livingston, to draft a declaration that was explaining this decision, as I pointed out earlier on. And for the next couple of weeks, Jefferson sat alone, essentially, and drafted the text. There were some discussions with this committee, and then the committee, after agreeing, presented the draft to Congress. Congress approved it July 2nd. They adopted the Lee Resolution. And as you know, July 4th, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. July 5th, Congress ordered the document printed as broadside. That's the Dunlop broadside, and that's this document that we see so frequently is not the original or a cleaned up version of the original. It's a printed broadside that was distributed far and wide within the colonies. All right, so the deed's done. There's no turning back now. And the signers of the Declaration of Independence, there were 56 of them, a really diverse lot that was truly representative of the colonies, of the population of the colonies at the time. Of course, attorneys were the largest group. They always seem to be. But there were also merchants and plantation owners and farmers, and even a musician. I got to say that I wish today's Congress was populated by a similarly diverse group of representatives. But the first signer, as you well know, was John Hancock. And the reason was that he was the president of the Continental Congress. But there were also a whole bunch of other folks that stepped up early, including Jefferson as author, Ben Franklin, Adams, both Adams, John and Samuel, and Robert Morris. And here you can see that famous bold, not only bold, but very deep autograph that John Hancock applied here. And as the first signer, because he was president of the Second Continental Congress, he too had a free franc, and you can see an example here. This document came up for sale not that long ago and sold for $4,000, a free franc of John Hancock. It was addressed to the Honorable Council of Safety, the state of Pennsylvania, and on the back there's a docketing that says, from the President of Congress, Baltimore. That's where it was sent from in 1777. In this case, Jefferson is another individual who got a free franc as the primary author, and you can see here free is written twice, both in the upper left-hand corner where Jefferson signed it, and then more boldly in the upper right corner as well. And this covers a addressed in his hand to a Mr. Edward Hall in Norfolk, Virginia. And you can see the cancellation in the center, the circular date stamp in the center there. Ben Franklin, this is a kind of faded one, but down below in the lower left, it says, free B. Franklin. He switched that around later on to say B. Free Franklin, but this was the more traditional version here. John Adams, also was entitled to a free franking privilege. And this one was sent to the Reverend Belknap in Boston. Belknap, American clergyman and historian, and he's well known today for his history of New Hampshire. In fact, it's my understanding that's the earliest example of any history of any of the colonies being written earliest, so at that point in time. Samuel Adams, again, another free franker. This letter was sent to Philadelphia, and this is well after the signing, but not too distant away. In 1779, it was addressed to Governor Trumbull of Connecticut. I used to live in Trumbull, Connecticut, so they must have liked him, I guess. And you can see in the at the bottom here this explosion of it, where it says, "I have the honor to be Your Excellency's most humble servant," and he signs it, Sam Adams. Robert Morris, another of the signers, and it says up on top there, "Free R. Morris," and he signed it, Robert Morris, as chairman of the secret committee, and it was sent to Thomas Mumford at Groton, Connecticut, 2 days after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. We continued after the colonial period, when stamps were first issued, to celebrate the signing of the Declaration on postage stamps. And here we see Scott number 120 from 1869, that famous portrait of the Declaration of Independence. Here it is again, from a 1976 issue. And this was the bicentennial the celebration of the signing of the Declaration. There were a lot of lesser known signatories that have been philately honored. Here we have Abraham Clark from New Jersey, largely a self-educated attorney and a public servant, known as the poor man's counselor. He was a prominent patriot in New Jersey, served in Congress under, this was sort of unique, well, not unique, but uncommon. He served in Congress under both the Articles of Confederation and then under the new Constitution once it was signed. In contrast with the last, I don't know, 50 or 100 years, where once you get into Congress, you tend to stay in Congress. These were gentlemen farmers or gentlemen merchants, and they served a few years to serve their nation. Then they went back home. So there's a great deal of turnover in these early years. And that's why Abraham Clark is a bit unusual in having served under both the Articles of Confederation and the new Constitution as well. Josiah Bartlett from New Hampshire, another of the lesser known individuals who've been honored, physician, patriot leader. He became the president and the governor of New Hampshire. And as even though he was not an attorney, he was a vocal advocate for organizing the state and having a state constitution with laws and regulations as well. Thomas Stone from Maryland, an attorney and a farmer, and he was a moderate. He was one of those early proponents of trying to come up with a reconciliation with the British. He was not a separatist initially. until things got to the point where everybody was a separatist. And then finally, here's an example of George Walton, one of the three signers from the colony and then state of Georgia. He was an orphan and became Savannah attorney, and he was an early separatist. He was wounded during the war, captured, but he held major offices, including the governor of Georgia and a U.S. senator. Okay, well, that's the road to independence that led us to becoming an independent nation. But this is only part of the story, and I've got a full-length article on this that will be coming out in the July issue of the American Philatelist. But let me close with a shameless plug. Marianne mentioned that I'm working on a book, and a lot of the illustrations you saw today are from my forthcoming book, Fundamentals of Postal History. Going to be published next year, so I've got a lot of work to do. And as soon as I get off of this presentation, I'm going back to writing a book. So that's the story. If you would like a copy of this presentation, I'll be happy to send you a PDF. Simple email address, gary@philatelicresearch.org. And I thank you for your attention.